All right, guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, we're going to have a wide receiver prospect ranking tier list. These are going to be a few guys that we'll see in this upcoming draft. We got some big names on here like Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Jalen Hyatt. And then we got a few other guys that I want to talk about like Marvin Mims and even guys like Tank Dell that we'll talk about, who's the first player on this list. So first, I'm going to put him in the day 3 category. I kind of see him. He's a very athletic receiver, and I think he'll be good depending on what system he goes to. But he's one of those guys where I feel like there's a lot of guys in this draft that are very similar to him in a lot of aspects, especially athleticism wise, but they're kind of more polished in their game. Next up, we got Marvin Mims, and I'm going to put him honestly in the top 50. There's definitely been some buzz about him getting drafted potentially to a team like the Giants, and I think this would be great for him. I loved him coming out of college. He was a great prospect overall, and especially playing on that Oklahoma team. He was an absolute dog there. Next, we got Xavier Hutchinson, and I'm going probably day 3 for him. I think he's also a guy where I kind of have him in that same level as Tank Dell. I'm just not too big on him. Next, we got Josh Downs. I'm going to say top 30, honestly, which might surprise some people. But I think if he gets drafted in the first round, where I definitely could see him getting drafted, being in that area of potentially getting drafted to the Eagles, he's just going to be an absolute dog. And I'm kind of struggling to either put him in the top 30 or top 50. I think personally for me, he's in my top 30, so I'm going to leave him there. But I could definitely see him getting drafted in the second round. But if he gets drafted in the top 30, I wouldn't be surprised, as he definitely deserves it. Jalen Hyatt, I'm having in the top 50 too. I'm not a huge fan of his game overall, very athletic, but I would say he's kind of around that area of Marvin Mims for them. I'm pretty sure I have Jalen Hyatt at 6 and Marvin Mims at 7 overall ranking wise. Jalen Hyatt has a few holes in his game, and he's very athletic, so I think he'll be able to find a role in the NFL. I mean, I think he's going to get drafted in the top 50, so I think he's going to be a great player, but there is some concerns for me. Next up, we got Zay Flowers. I would say he's also in that kind of mid first round area. I don't really see him being in the top 15 necessarily, but he is my third receiver in my rankings. Actually, you know what? We'll put him in the top 15. I'm not going to, this may be a hot take, but these are my guys, so I'm going with him. I think he's going to be an absolute dog in the NFL. I have him at third, like I said. So I'm not projecting him to be drafted in the top 15 necessarily, but I do think he should be. If he got drafted even by the Patriots at 14, great pick overall. Next up, we got Cedric Tillman. I see him as a second round guy-ish. I'll put him in the top 50 overall. Kind of like Jalen Hyatt, where he's got to play in that Tennessee offense. I don't think he's as athletic, obviously. Jalen Hyatt, absolute speed threat down the field, but Cedric Tillman, great receiver overall too. Next, we got Jonathan Mingo. I'm putting him in that third round area. The difference between the third round and the day 3 for me is I feel like a guy in the third round like him is probably better than some of these guys that we'll see in the day 3. Like next, we got Parker Washington, who was a great receiver in college at Penn State, but just doesn't have the tangibles that the rest of these guys have, including a guy like Jordan Addison, who I have as my second receiver in the draft. I'm going to put him in the top 15 too. He's up there with Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnston for me, who we'll talk about in a little bit. I know there's some holes in his game, but I think he's going to be a great player in the NFL. Next up, we got Charlie Jones. I think he's also a day 3 guy, kind of in that mix of all those receivers, where if they go to a good spot and they get into a good offense and they're training really well, they could be great players in the NFL. But just looking at them, I guess, on paper wise, comparing them to the rest of the prospects, I don't think they're as high. Like I talked about Quentin Johnston, putting him in my top 15. These aren't in order either. I'm just putting them in the rows. I think he's the number 1 receiver in this draft class. And I know there's a few people that have different opinions on a lot of these guys, especially, I guess, the top 4 as we talk about them, between Jackson Smith and Jigba and Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, all those guys. Next up, we got A.T. Perry. And I think for a guy like him, I'm kind of on the fence. I would say that I probably put him in the third round. He's kind of, I don't think he's really towards the end of the day three. I would say he would be maybe the start of day three, but I'll keep him in the third round. I think he's third or fourth round ish area. And then next up, we got Ronnie Bell. I would say he's in that day three area ish. Great receiver overall. But just like I said, with most of these day three guys, if we're looking at these guys on paper, they just don't really match up as well with the rest of the guys that we see on this list. And then finally, we got Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is a top. This might be a little controversial, but I'm going top 30. I think he's really close to the rest of these guys. I think he's really close to Zay Flowers, but I'm giving him the top 30 just because I think he will probably get drafted in the top 15. I wouldn't be surprised, but he's a guy where I think he's going to get restricted to the slot a lot in the NFL, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do have concerns. And I think Zay Flowers overall is just a little bit better of a player. And if I'm going to be honest, I don't know who this is. We're going to put him in the third round. I couldn't find his picture on the combine, so I might just be completely blanking here, but we're going to put him in the day three. So overall, a lot of these guys it's mostly, I'm going off of my opinion too. Like I talked about, Jackson Smith-Njigba could be your number one receiver in your class, and I wouldn't be surprised. He's a great player, but I personally have him as my fourth best receiver. I think there's a lot of guys in this class, especially like I said earlier, in that top 4 or 5 area where you could make a case for any of them, and I completely get it. Quentin Johnston's my number one guy just because he kind of has that size, and I compare him a lot to Andre Johnson. That's my pro comp for him. And for a lot of these guys in this class, they don't really have that size. And Quentin Johnston does still have a few holes in his game. And that's why I think the conversation's out there for who the best receiver is in this draft, just because there's so many different guys, and that I wouldn't say there's necessarily a solidified number one overall. And sometimes that's good too. So then we can have a bit of a discussion about this. So if you guys like this video and you want me to do another ranking of, I can do any single position you want me to talk about in this upcoming draft. This draft is going to be great overall with a lot of great defensive players. So if you guys want to see me do that, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.